Major changes are coming to the Pittsburgh Penguins as new details have emerged after the Dan Muse hiring, and some of the rumors that are flying around will have Penguins fans absolutely shocked. We're going to break down what these rumors are and what this means for the future of Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Penguins Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the Pittsburgh Penguins, this is the place to be for all your daily Pittsburgh Penguins content. So again, go down below, hit that free subscribe button, and you get to stay up to date with everything Penguins. But Mark, let's get right into it. This is not an official report, but there's a lot of rumors flying around after Dan Muse was hired as the new head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And obviously we broke that down in a video yesterday. And I think it's a pretty good hiring. At face value, I think that he's going to bring a lot of really good things to the team and the organization. We'll touch on that again in this video a little bit. But this rumor from Hockey Insider, so again, take it with a grain of salt, just Hockey Insider on Twitter. Although they've gotten some things right in the past, but again, take it with a grain of salt. Breaking news, Sidney Crosby is not happy with the new choice for Penguins head coach Dan Muse. According to my source, Crosby would have strongly preferred the other candidate for the position, which is very vague, by the way. So again, take this tweet with a grain of salt. There is a growing divide being created between Sid and the Pens. Trade soon. So there's a lot of rumors flying out there, and I want your thoughts on this, Mark, that a lot of people are, saying that this is maybe a conspiracy theory that Kyle Dubas, would have hired maybe Mitch Love or DJ Smith, which would have been the other two candidates that we heard that maybe Sidney Crosby, in that tweet at least, would have preferred. But, there's a conspiracy out there that, he hired Dan Muse to kind of upset Sidney Crosby and see if he can end up trading him. I don't think there's anything to that, but what do you think about that?
I mean, the big thing is, if you're Kyle Dubas, you have the franchise player, the face of the league for the NHL season after season. Moving on from Crosby would be stupid. And I'd like to think that Dubas is not this dumb to go out and upset his franchise player, one of the best players of all time, to move on to a new team. Listen, I'm sure Crosby is not happy they moved on from Mike Sullivan, hired someone with less experience and brought in a team that looks like a retool. But at the end of the day, everything seems like Crosby wants to stay in Pittsburgh. Fans want him there. Players want him there. He wants to be there himself. If they hypothetically move on from Crosby, you really accelerate this rebuild, and it's not going to be a retool without Crosby. But in my mind, I don't think Dubas is going out there to plot against Sidney Crosby. And if he is, that's a fireable offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's no way that Kyle Dubas has gone out and hired a head coach just for that reason alone. That would be absolutely absurd and, again, a fireable offense. Although I do want to say that, again, take this first tweet and rumor with a grain of salt. Elliotte Friedman did come out today and said that Dan Muse head coaching hire will lead to people in Crosby's orbit asking him if he's sure he still wants to stay in Pittsburgh, but, and this is a quote from Elliotte Friedman, I feel he's loyal to the logo. And I wanted to bring this one up specifically because this, and based on what you said as well, with him saying basically he's probably upset because you're hiring a coach with less experience. I think there is something to that, actually, because, this reminds me of Matt Sundin. I read Matt Sundin's book earlier this year, and he went on to say that he truly believed that, like, the 2007-2008 Toronto Maple Leafs were a good team and were going to make the playoffs and maybe could win a Stanley Cup. In his mind, he thought that they could still compete and that he could still compete. But that wasn't true. And I'm not saying that that's not true for Sidney Crosby, right? Like, I'm saying that Sidney Crosby is still a great player, and I'm sure he wants to compete. But I think he's in that mindset that he thinks the team is a little bit better than it is, and he would have preferred to either keep Mike Sullivan or get a guy with a little bit more experience to see if they can make the playoffs and make some noise before he retires here. Because he knows the writing's on the wall. He's getting older. He's still playing at a great level, but the writing is on the wall. So any thoughts on that, Mark? Because, again, he is loyal to the logo. I don't think he wants to be traded, but I think he is a little bit disgruntled that, things are not moving at a faster pace.
I mean, that's the big thing. You still have a lot of core players. I mean, Letang, Malkin, Crosby, these guys have been on this team forever, it feels like. And I mean, their entirety of their careers. But the big thing is Crosby is looking at this. He's getting to the latter half of his career. We know Malkin is very close to retirement. Letang is that way as well. But this is a team that feels like it's only a couple pieces, a goaltender that can stop the first shot and maybe a couple defensemen that can play defense away from being a competitive team, going back to the playoffs, moving on from Mike Sullivan to once again bringing in a lesser experienced coach. I'm not saying Muse is a bad coach, but he does not have the experience that we've seen Sullivan have. having Sullivan here with a retooled team, I think you have a real shot at getting back to the playoffs this year. Muse could come in and do the exact same thing, but I do think with this, Crosby wants to be here. I think it's very obvious at this point. Crosby wants to retire as a Penguin. If he didn't, he probably would have requested a trade already or made it seem like he wanted a trade. This is a team where I do think they can still compete. I think they're going to fight for a wild card spot, a playoff spot this year. But I do think they took a tiny bit of a step back, and hopefully this doesn't disgruntle Crosby too much.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see, heading into this season, if there is any truth to that. Obviously, he's never going to say if there's truth to that, and I'm sure he wants to stay a Pittsburgh Penguin, and we'll figure it out. But in terms of Dan Muse, if you're not familiar, he has won in Pittsburgh before. He was the coach of the Yale team, and they won at the Consol Energy Center back in 2013. Again, that's not the NHL. Keep that in mind. But in terms of who he is as a coach, he was the assistant coach for the New York Rangers just this past season, or the past couple seasons, I should say, and the Rangers went to an Eastern Conference final with him. He's really good at player development and special teams. Now, the Rangers, you could look at them and go, where was the player development? I think that's more of an organizational issue than it is a coaching staff issue, but really good at special teams, and I think he's going to help this team. And again, a younger voice, a new voice. Mike Sullivan, I think, was getting a bit stale in Pittsburgh to a degree. Like, I think if he comes back, you're still going to have like a decent season, right? And he's still, I think he's a great head coach. But, at some point, I think you do have to move on. It's just the nature of the NHL. And I think it was time for the Penguins. And, of course, they're getting younger, right? So this was also Kyle Dubas' statement on head coach Dan Muse. And I thought this was interesting to pair this with the initial report or rumor, I should say, that Crosby would have preferred another candidate. And Dubas said, in terms of the process, during this process, we met with many candidates who we felt would have been a great fit for the next head coach. Dan Muse stood out as the best choice. And what separated Dan was his ability to develop players, win at all levels where he's been a head coach, and his consistent success coaching special teams in the NHL. So it's going to be, again, interesting. When you look at both sides of that, Dan does bring a lot to the table. He really does, and he's won at different levels, but he doesn't have too much time and doesn't have any time in the NHL as a head coach. So again, going to be interesting. Again, there's multiple articles about this, that Sidney Crosby, and you knew this was going to happen. This was already a rumor before. I think a lot of Penguins fans are probably scoffing at this, rolling their eyes. This was a rumor before Mike Sullivan was even fired. If they're going to fire Mike Sullivan, Crosby's going to hate whoever comes in, right? That was like the rumor that was flying around there. So again, I just wonder if Sidney Crosby is a little disgruntled with the fact that things aren't moving a little bit faster so they can compete before he turns, 39, 40 years old. Although I think that he's probably going to play till he's like 41 or 42 because he's just an elite player in this league. But last thing I wanted to touch on too, looking forward to see how Dan Muse works with Malkin, Letang, and Karlsson. All of them disappointing seasons last year. Obviously Letang with some health issues, so that's a little bit different from the other two guys. But Malkin had a very disappointing, like it's looking like he is regressing at this point. Disappointing season for him. Do you think that Dan Muse can kind of inject some life into some of the older guys on this team? Because we know what the younger guys can bring, and it is a little bit of inexperience, but there is some flashes of brilliance. But what do you think Dan Muse is going to be able to do with maybe some of the older guys on the team?
I mean, the big thing is I think he can step in and kind of fix this out a tiny bit. Malkin's one guy that's going to have to step up himself. Letang was dealing with a few injuries, and I do think Karlsson still has a lot of gas in the tank. I mean, the Four Nations, and I don't want to beat the drum that Karlsson can get back to prime form, but during the Four Nations, we've seen him stationed on a right D with a shutdown guy on the left, and this was the best we've seen him in quite some time. So maybe going out, the GM, Kyle Dubas, goes out to pick up an actual defensive defenseman to play with Karlsson. This is a team that has the veterans. We could see Dan step in to help these guys, but I think it really sits on their own shoulders to really turn this around, step up, show the young guys, and if they want to be competitive, Crosby has already showed that he wants to do this with his insane pace. These other guys are going to almost have to carry their own weight to get this team back into contention.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good point too. I think new coach coming in, you have a lot of younger players that are going to be on the roster next year. We know that. Like, I'd be shocked if a lot of the younger guys who finish the year don't make the team out of training camp. And I think with the older guys, they have a new responsibility now to not just play well, but to show the younger guys the ropes, and maybe that'll kind of, turn the boat around. So, or turn the ship around, I should say. So it's going to be interesting to see. Let us know in the comments what you think about this rumor. I'll call it a rumor. And again, even Friedman was saying it's not definite. This is not actually happening, but the questions are going to start popping up. So it's going to be interesting. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything Pittsburgh Penguins.